And there's the guy responsible for turning Katika Hosu, his wife, into a whole different swimmer.
It's funny to hear a female talk about routes. Like, it's funny.
Can you give us a twirl and tell us about your outfit?
A twirl? Like...
A twirl, a pirouette. Here we go.
Mainstream sports are referred to as a space where men can go and know it's going to be by, for, and about men. A saying heard throughout the history of the sport market. Even in today's society of growing acceptance and equality, within the industry of sport media, there are still stark occurrences of sexism. From limited television coverage to the objectification of female reporters and athletes, there are still many things still standing as obstacles for women in the sports world. By diving into the research of these issues, we can start to implement change and create an equal playing field for both women and men. Within the history of sexism, nowhere has it been so prominent as in the world of sport, and our view into this world is through the media. From topics such as the objectification of both female athletes and reporters to the inequality of coverage for women's sports. In 2014, only 3.2% of network television airtime was given to women's sports. ESPN's SportsCenter and other highly rated sports talk shows have had a disturbingly low increase in media coverage even in the modern age of professional sports.
Is that the amount of coverage has actually declined over the past 20 years, which is quite shocking and surprising for us as researchers.
The issue isn't that there are not female sports fans. As reported in 2011, with the 65% of Americans that watch football, almost 55% were women. For the Women's World Cup final for soccer, over 43.2 million viewers tuned in 2015. If the issue is not the lack of women who are sports fans, then what is? Is it because female sports have an inherently less violent nature about them, which makes them less enjoyable to watch? There have been several statements as to why female sports are sometimes considered more boring. According to sports writer Paul Gallico in 1936, it is a lady's business to look beautiful, and there are hardly any sports in which she seems able to do that. HBO sports personality Bill Simmons in 2006 commented on the WNBA, while the vast majority of WNBA players lack crossover sex appeal, the baggy uniforms don't help. Monica Abbott has dedicated her life to becoming a professional athlete in a sport that is often not given as much recognition in the media as its male counterpart. Abbott has competed in the National Pro Fast Pitch League for several years as a record-breaking pitcher and has also competed with the U.S. Olympic team back in 2008. How do you feel really specifically about the inequality of television coverage between men and women's sports? Let's say the difference between men and women's, softball and baseball,
I think it's tough, it's really tough. There's so much television coverage now in the college networks, mm-hmm. right? The SEC network, the Big Ten network, the Pac-12 network. All of these games are being live streamed and on TV consistently. And then you go past college and you still are only seeing the big four: baseball, basketball, hockey, and football. Like, where are the women's sport? Mm-hmm. Like, where's softball? Like, why isn't any professional softball being broadcasted?
Yeah.
Why isn't professional soccer more accessible? And not only from ESPN, but what about CBS and TBS and all those other networks out there?
You've played college softball, you played professional softball, you play professional softball now. What would you say to those comments that people say, oh, well, women's sports, they're just not, engaging enough?
There's no way.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way. That's just laughable. There's no way that women's sports are not engaging. Yes, does women's basketball have less dunks? Probably.
Yeah.
But are they better at passing? Is the game faster? And women's softball, I'm throwing 75 miles per hour. It's harder to react to 75 mile per hour softball than a 90 mile per hour baseball,
Eric Galco, a professor of sports law at Caldwell University and lead director at Optimum Scouting, often works with athletes and executives in the NFL. With some of the media contracts that ESPN holds, such as the difference between NBA and the WNBA, how do you think these larger media companies, ESPN, Fox Sports, what are the changes they really need to make?
Yeah, I think it's still going on. I think it's still increasing. And, we've seen ESPN major networks take a hit financially this year, and they have to kind of scale back, but they're still being proactive about that too. And kind of that long game, right, of having the affirmative action first and hoping the returns pay dividends later. That's what they're doing right now too. So I think it's still growing, but at the same time, the numbers aren't there to back up an increase in viewership. Viewership has gone up, especially I think women's soccer is the biggest area where it's seen almost equivalent it. I know from my perspective, I can care less about the men's soccer team, but the women's soccer team might miss a game for the World Cup, and I'm not even a soccer fan. I think that's what a lot of people are seeing, what these media companies are seeing as a return. So, people want exciting content. They want exciting viewers, and I think initially there was that stereotype or that bias that women's sports weren't as fun to watch on TV, and I think women's soccer has been a galvanizing reason for that. But certainly, as they see more returns, they'll slowly do it. So I don't think it'll be a sharp increase just because the content's not there, and as great as ESPN wants to be to make sure that both sides are being served, they got to look out for the bottom dollar. But I will say that as the numbers go up, as viewership goes up related to how much money they're spending, that'll go up together too. So once the WNBA reaches a certain level where, hey, the viewership's going higher up, they can command more of the money salary-wise. I think it's going to happen. I think it's starting to happen already. And like I said, the women's soccer has been the main reason why women's sports across the board are going up in viewership.
How would you respond to the idea that sports are a male institution, as in made for men, made by men, and that's really what they're catering to? And do you think that has changed now?
Hopefully. I think it's starting to. I actually think indirectly, people in the NFL I talked about, the breast cancer awareness they started had to be over a decade ago. And the NFL realized then they did this because it's a concerted action. They want to take care of things. But it's become something where they've realized that, hey, those months and appreciation for the female viewers that are watching the NFL, it grew substantially. And their ratings go up during those weeks because they were targeting a lot of their advertisements to female watchers of the sport, and they realize, like, oh crap, we're way behind on this, and we're not catering to that audience all the time too. I think sports are getting a lot better at that, and it's in the NFL's best interest and all sports' best interest to cater to more female viewers and female reporters.
Another pressing issue is how this content is being portrayed. Female athletes are often sexualized in the media, and are regarded more for their appearances than for their accolades. This is also true of female sportscasters, such as Erin Andrews, who is criticized for her outfits on screen. Erin Andrews still wants to be regarded as a serious journalist who dresses like a casino cocktail waitress. Phil Mushnick also spoke about the U.S. women's gymnastics team, saying virtually no breasts, no hips, no natural progression.
Do with the type of coverage within that 2 to 4%. Female athletes, when compared to their male counterparts, are much more likely to be portrayed off the court, out of uniform, and in highly sexualized poses.
Fox News reporter Catherine Marsh shares her perspective on the objectification of female reporters.
Either perfect looking, or if you're not more perfect looking enough, men, you see men, like 50-year-old men with like 25-year-old women, but you kind of don't really ever see vice versa. Mm-hmm. You kind of always see, like, older men kind of don't really, have to look as young and as, beautiful as, like, say, an older woman. I could definitely see that. I don't know. I definitely feel like, sometimes people like just judge you by your appearance and don't listen to what you really are saying. Mm-hmm. Like, I'd so much rather listen to a much more educated person, who knows what they're talking about, so I just don't like, people just objectify looks necessarily.
The 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio were highly criticized for having sexist coverage. When Corey Cogdill won the bronze medal for women's trap shooting, the Chicago Tribune didn't refer to her by name, but instead stated, "Wife of a Bears lineman wins bronze." In another instance, when Andy Murray won the singles title for men's tennis.
The first person ever to win 2 Olympic tennis gold medals.
To defend the singles title, I think Venus and Serena have won about 4 each.
The discrediting of female athletes and reporters is a common occurrence, such as the comment made by Cam Newton of the Carolina Panthers. When Newton stated that it was funny to hear a female talking about roots, reporter Jordan Rodriguez fired back on Twitter about the incident, stating, "I don't think it's funny. I think it's my job."
Like, those women that are out there reporting in the men's world, like, they're so educated on their sport. And I challenge some of the men that are coming into trying to, like, break into the softball sport to be just as educated, because I can tell you, I do a ton of interviews, and I come across these, not everyone, but quite a few males that are new into the business and trying to get an interview, and I do the interview with them, and they read off the Wikipedia page. I'm like, it doesn't take a lot of time to come up with 3-5 solid-based questions. Do a little bit of research, read a little bit. Like, that doesn't take a lot of time. And my question to those guys is, would you have done that if I was Peyton Manning?
Yeah.
Would you have done that if I was the Tom Brady, or if I was Justin Verlander? Would you have gone unprepared into that interview? So why are you doing that to me?
Guys are always watching sports. They're always watching sports. They always kind of respect what comes out of a guy's mouth. you know, but kind of when a female talks, they're kind of waiting for her to almost mess up. They're kind of waiting for her to kind of, you know, say something so they can, you know, post about it or something.
The sports of MMA and UFC fighting is known to be predominantly male. Master Johnny Guerrero of Guerrero Martial Arts trains athletes of all gender and ages and sees the definitive difference in coverage of women's martial arts.
In martial arts, as in other sports, it's a male-dominated sport. It's a lot of male athletes, so there's a big difference in how they cover and how many people are involved, and I think that kind of makes it the reason why a lot of people focus more on men, because a lot of people think that women shouldn't be doing martial arts. I think, well, it's all about how they look, and I think that a lot of emphasis is put on the outside. If they're pretty, if they're not pretty, if they're sexy, if they're not sexy. And I think that a lot of organizations, that's what they really focus on. So a lot of the prettier fighters seem like to get the more publicity, like Gina Carano and Miesha Tate. And Ronda Rousey too, she was a good looking girl too. But I think that a lot of the organizations focus a lot more on how the females look rather than how they perform.
But is this a socialized issue? Currently, men dominate the sport market, so culturally, we are used to seeing men as the leaders in sport. In regards to the comments made by Cam Newton, we can see the other perspective.
But I think at the same time, he does, you know, he talks to guys on the field all day long. He talks to guys on the field in practice, in the room, like his coach is a guy, his teammates are guys, everyone's guy all the time when he talks football. So maybe in a sense, this woman, you know, she was, you know, he just wasn't familiar with talking plays with a girl.
Still goes on because there's just this inherent bias of, you know, players are seeing, you know, for example, Cam Newton may see Donovan McNabb, former NFL quarterback, talking about sports, and he's used to that. He knows that they can relate. So when they have an interview, it's more comfortable. And players in the NFL and across all sports, I'm sure, just feel more comfortable with players they know. And then that ties to the men aspect of things, and they can't feel that same way. And you know, I think what's interesting in sports, and NFL teams have talked about this with Jen Selter, who worked for the Arizona Cardinals, is, you know, seeing that NBA teams are hiring former WNBA players and successful players. And it's been fun to think about, not just in the sports world, but also in the media world, is that as these teams are more open to hiring people who have been experienced and are highly successful female athletes in their sport and valuing them on the court behind scenes.
With popular co-ed sports beginning to gain traction, such as the obstacle course show American Ninja Warrior, there are several incredible female athletes that have paved the way for showing the strength of women. As a sport, the main focus is to show off the athlete's strength and ability under pressure. For women, this sport has had its own growth regarding sexism. Tell me a little bit about your media involvement with Ninja Warrior.
Yeah, so I started the Ninja Babes, which is a female ninja athlete empowerment group, and I've been interviewing women from the show, women who, like Jessie Graff, who have gone the furthest, but also women who have fallen on the second obstacle, just to gain a broad perspective and realize that the experience that women in this sport have is of all levels and all ranges.
But talking now from the female perspective, you have this women's empowerment group. Would you say that sometimes the female athletes are discredited, you know, in this competition, or somewhat objectified with the commentators?
You know, we celebrate every single time a woman makes it on a certain obstacle. Like, we'll say, like, you were the first woman to make it up the warp wall, blah, blah, blah. Whereas when they're looking at the men, they just say, like, oh, you're the first athlete to make it up. You're the first athlete to this or that. There's still, like, this distinguishing factor between, like, oh, but you were the first woman to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm glad that we're recognizing women's accomplishments and celebrating those factors, but still, like, where do we draw the line between we're all just celebrating an accomplishment versus, like, oh, but you did it and you're a woman, wow, that's extra special. One of the commentators had made a comment about the fact that I represent women and the Ninja Babe, and how how women in the sport don't feel the need to be quote-unquote tomboys, but we can be girly if we want to. And you know, the first time I heard it, I was like, what does he mean by that? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, we should be tomboys, or it's weird that we're not tomboys, or like, what is a tomboy and what is girly? Like, what should I have braided my hair? Like, I didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't understand.
Yeah. Do you think that with American Ninja Warrior, with the TV show specifically, that has made an impact for female athletes?
I do think that it has, especially with the fan base that we all are getting. There's so many girls and guys that look up to the female athletes, not just because, oh wow, it's like shocking that you're a girl and you did this, but no, because they're great athletes. And so I think that, especially from our own viewer base and our own fan base, starting there, we've gained a lot of respect and a lot of just common honor from every side of it.
So with our view of sexism in our society continuously adapting, what are the changes that both men and women in the sport industry can implement?
We need women to stay in the sport. Like, that's one thing. Like, find another avenue. Go, be a sports reporter, run your local league, own a team, why not you? Kind of thing. Like, own a team. Like, why not? Like, be the sports media director, be the marketing manager, like, for a sports team. Like, we need more women involved, and we need people to stay in the sport.
I think it starts with just the way people, the old way of people thinking, the old mentality of, again, women are supposed to be doing ballet or they're supposed to be doing dance class. And I think that having more women participate in martial arts, having more girls participate in martial arts or even do other sports, it kind of shows that the women are a force to be reckoned with also.
So I think just women being unapologetic about the fact that I can have biceps, and there's totally nothing wrong with that. That is great. That is commendable. And so I think as the more that people step out into their own identity and being proud of themselves for who they are, people will begin to recognize that these stereotypes don't make sense. Yeah. And that we can just look at people for who they are and not judge so much, man or woman, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that.
The overlying issues that have been highlighted here are those of ignorance and culture. Here in America, our sport culture is centered around football, baseball, and basketball. In order for women's sports to gain the same level of respect, major media networks need to allot more television coverage. More women need to be given coaching and executive positions, and everyone in the industry needs to only judge people on their accolades and not by their gender.